Arkham Horror is a really fun game with a lot of rules. Rules that it can be really easy to confuse or mix up. And based on the response to the last video I posted about this, you guys seem to agree. Since there were a lot of comments clarifying things or asking questions, I thought I'd do another video here and go over 5 more rules that you might be getting wrong in Arkham Horror. I'm Jeremy Henderson with Elevation Games, and as I said, the last video I posted about the Arkham Horror LCG got a huge response. Tons of folks posted rules that they got wrong themselves, or clarifying points on things that I had said in the video. It's clearly something people are interested in, so I thought I'd make another video with 5 more rules that you might be getting wrong in Arkham Horror because I've gotten them wrong, and apparently, judging by some of those comments, so have some of you. So let's get down to it. Rule number 1, let's start with Peril. It can be a little confusing. There's a lot of disagreement within the community about this. An encounter card that says Peril on it is one that you can't get any help with. There seemed to be some feeling that you're not allowed to talk about it, but in actuality, the cards that you're not allowed to talk about actually have the hidden keyword on it. Cards that just say Peril, you can acknowledge that you have it, but you're not allowed to talk about it with other players, get advice from them, and they're not allowed to help you with it. But they can at least know you have it. The hidden cards, they're technically not even supposed to know that you have it. There needs to be a little bit of a reality check here, though. When you're playing a game set around a table with other people, they're going to notice that you pick up an encounter card and then don't do anything with it. So more than likely, they're going to know you've got a hidden card. That's fine. Just don't talk about it. And in some cases, in some of the expansions, even saying certain words on those hidden cards can cause some pretty drastic reactions. But the important takeaway here is, while you can't help with Peril cards, and you can't help with hidden cards, you actually can help with other encounter cards. This is something people overlook a lot. When you draw an encounter card, it technically enters your threat area, that space right in front of you on the table. And once it does that, as long as you're in the same location with another investigator, they can actually help you with that particular encounter card. So if, for instance, it tells you you have to spend an action to test something in order to get rid of that card, or if you have to test something or suffer a consequence, you can help that person by donating cards to the cause. Using the symbols on the card to bump up their basic stat that they're trying to test. You can also, if it has an action symbol on it, actually trigger that action yourself. So if, for instance, a Guardian has some sort of encounter card in their threat area that they have to take an action to test books to get rid of, that could be hard for a lot of Guardians. But if there's another Seeker there, they can actually take that action themselves on their turn and trigger that test with their much higher book score and get rid of that card for the Guardian. So there's a lot of opportunities there to help other players out as long as they're in the same place as you. The second rule a lot of people get wrong, this one is really a clarification. I brought up the Mulligan rule in my last video, but there was a little bit of misunderstanding about how it works. It's actually really powerful once you know the entire sequence. So if you haven't watched the last video or don't know about it, the Mulligan rule says that when you draw your initial hand of cards, you can look through them, and any cards that you don't like, you can take out of your hand and set them aside. Then you can draw that many cards from your draw deck and add them to your hand. So basically, you can just replace any cards that you don't like. Now you can only do this one time, so if you draw that second group of cards and you still don't like what you got, you're out of luck. But at least you have the opportunity to replace them once. The only thing that this doesn't apply to is weakness cards. So you're actually not allowed to start with a weakness card in your starting hand. So if you happen to draw a weakness card, either in your first initial draw or as part of that mulligan, you get to set that weakness card aside and draw another card to replace it. So again, you can see how this is pretty powerful. It can give you a much stronger starting hand than you might otherwise have had. Once you've done this, you take those cards that you set aside, including any weaknesses that you might have set aside, and shuffle those back into your deck. The third rule, at this point we're going to start talking about enemies. Enemy AI is one of the hardest things to get right in Arkham Horror. It's one I struggled with for a while. There's a lot of complex rules about how enemies move and engage. But once you actually understand all of the elements, it's not too difficult. One thing I brought up in the last video are prey enemies. So the basic thing to know there is, if an enemy has a prey listed on its card, that only comes into effect when they're trying to decide a tiebreaker. When there are two investigators equally distant to equally valid targets. So basically, in every case, a monster is going to go towards any investigator that is closest to it. That's always going to be its first preference. If there are two investigators that are the same distance, and both are equally valid targets, then that monster will use that prey keyword as a tiebreaker to determine which one of those investigators it goes after. If neither one of those investigators qualify for whatever the prey keyword says, at that point the lead investigator can decide which person it's going to go after. But the important thing to note here is that this is how it works for the vast majority of monsters, but there are actually a good number of cards that have the prey-only keyword on them. These come up in several of the investigators' special weaknesses, so weaknesses that are tied to a specific investigator. And it comes up often enough that it seemed worth calling out. The prey-only enemies operate a little differently. Instead of using the prey to determine, to work as a tiebreaker and determine which character that monster is going to go after, that monster focuses on its prey to the exclusion of everything else. So a prey-only enemy will find whatever prey its target is on the board, and it will go towards that target, ignoring everything and everyone else. So, whereas a normal monster would move into a space with another investigator, stop, and immediately engage with that investigator, a prey-only enemy, if that investigator isn't their prey, will completely ignore them and just keep moving towards their prey. Now, an investigator can stop them by using one of their actions to optionally engage that monster and pull them into their threat area. But that's the only way they're going to stop. Otherwise, they're just going to ignore everyone and keep moving towards their prey. I'll take a quick moment here to say, if this is something you're interested in, if you are one of the people who commented on our last video with some of your own rules, please feel free to comment on this one as well. And we appreciate any likes or follows that you want to send our way. This is the kind of stuff we post here. And if you're interested, please feel free to head over to our website, elevation.games, and sign up for our newsletter. We routinely give out freebies over there, including a couple now of Arkham Horror player aids that I've made, showing things like some common keywords and an entire illustration of one entire round of play in the game. So if that's something you're interested in, please feel free to head over there and sign up for one of those and get some free stuff as well. This brings us to our fourth rule that you might be getting wrong, and this is around exhaustion and the enemy phase. So there seemed to be some confusion around exactly how exhaustion works, and exactly how the enemy phase progresses. So I thought I'd start by breaking the enemy phase itself down into two parts. The first part is movement. So once you enter the enemy phase, any readied enemy with a hunter keyword is going to move. That's another important point people tend to miss. If an enemy doesn't have the hunter keyword on it, it doesn't actually move. But if it does, at this point it'll move towards the closest valid target. Again, taking into account all those target rules we just talked about with the prey and all that other stuff. But once an enemy moves, if it moves into a location with an investigator, it will automatically engage that investigator at that point. Now, once every enemy has moved and potentially engaged, you move on to step 2. And this is where the monsters actually attack. So now, any enemy that is engaged with an investigator will automatically attack that investigator, dealing whatever damage is listed on their card, and exhaust after that. So once the enemies have all taken their turn, they've dealt whatever damage they're going to deal, they'll exhaust. At that point, you're at the end of the monster phase. The important thing to note here is you can trigger that exhaust early. So if on an investigator's turn, an investigator is engaged with an enemy and they choose to evade that enemy, that will exhaust them. Now, in order to get away from an enemy, you will need to use an action to evade them and exhaust them, and then you will need to use more actions to move away from the enemy into another location. But if you have exhausted them during the investigator phase, that enemy will not activate during the enemy phase. Exhausted enemies only ready up again at the bottom of the round during the upkeep phase. So at the same time that you're readying up all of your cards, the enemies also ready up any exhausted enemies at that point. So this brings us to the fifth and final rule that you might be getting wrong. Enemies can be in one of two states. They're either in a location or they're in a player's threat area engaged with them. This is important to know because it determines how players can interact with and move enemies around. So, ready enemies, when a player moves into the same space as them, they're going to automatically engage. And once an enemy is engaged with a player, they're stuck to their threat area until you deal with them in some way. You either exhaust them, you fight and kill them, or another investigator spends a turn or spends an action to pull them over to their threat area. And so knowing that, and knowing that they're stuck there, they'll actually follow you. So if you have enemies engaged with you and you move from one location to another one, they'll move with you. You'll also provoke an attack of opportunity. But if you are able to either mitigate or deal with the damage that is going to do to you, this can be a strong strategy and a way to move enemies into a more advantageous location. For instance, you might have an investigator like Roland who has cards that let him discover clues when an enemy is killed. Well, if you're in a location with no clues, maybe it would be better for you to eat whatever damage that enemy is going to send your way and pull them to a location with a lot of clues in it. Go ahead, fight them and kill them there, and then use your card that are going to let you get clues from that location. There's lots of situations like this because there are lots of different investigators you can play as. You just have to decide on a situation by situation basis if it's worth it. But the important thing to know here as well is that if an enemy is engaged with another player, and again, they're in the same space as you, you're allowed to interact with things in their threat area. That includes enemies. So if you're the Guardian and you're in the same place with your Seeker, and your Seeker has some sort of enemy engaged with them, you can actually spend one of your actions to take that enemy from them and engage them with you and move them over into your threat area. That might free the Seeker up to do what they're supposed to be doing, which is gathering clues, while you do what you're supposed to be doing as a Guardian, which is fighting enemies. Now, optionally, there are other ways that you can help. You can also just fight the enemy where it's at, leaving it engaged with that investigator. The thing you have to worry about here is, if you miss, you're going to deal all of the damage that you would have dealt to that enemy to the investigator they are currently engaged with. So you want to be really careful not to shoot your friend's face off if you can avoid it. This isn't something you have to worry about if an enemy is engaged with you and you miss. Nothing's going to happen. You've just missed. You've lost an action, but at least nobody else is going to get hurt from it. So there you go. 5 more Arkham Horror rules you might be getting wrong. Again, if you've enjoyed this and you want to see more stuff like this, let us know. Please give us a like and a follow. And we will be back soon with some more videos like this. See you then.